The world never realized how close it came to watching the global financial system snap in half. And it didn't happen in the 2000s or the 1980s or even during the Great Depression. It happened in complete silence, inside dimly lit rooms beneath London, where 8 of the most powerful central banks on Earth gathered around a single objective: protect the dollar at any cost. Before we start, subscribe, because once you understand what really happened inside the London gold pool, you'll never look at modern money the same way again. Most people imagine the 1960s as a decade of peace signs, space exploration, and booming prosperity. But behind the celebrations, the global monetary order was rotting from the inside. America had promised the world that the dollar was as good as gold, convertible on demand at $35 an ounce. It sounded stable. It looked disciplined. But deep under the surface, the promise was already cracking. The United States printed more dollars than it had gold to back, and the rest of the world was beginning to notice. Foreign governments, from France to Switzerland, ran the numbers and realized something was wrong. Dollars were flooding into global markets, paying for the Vietnam War, funding social programs, supporting Cold War strategies, and every one of those dollars carried the quiet guarantee that the U.S. could exchange it for physical gold. But the math didn't add up. Gold reserves were falling, dollar liabilities were climbing, and confidence, the real backbone of Bretton Woods, was starting to drift. What came next wasn't a public debate, or a democratic decision, or a policy announcement. It was a secret pact. 8 central banks, led by the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, quietly agreed to form a hidden alliance. Their mission wasn't economic growth. It wasn't stability. It wasn't cooperation. Their mission was to manipulate the global price of gold so the world never discovered the truth. The dollar was already weakened, already stretched, already bleeding. They called their operation the London Gold Pool. Gold flowed through London every day, and the pool placed itself right at the heart of that flow, watching, intervening, defending the price like a military operation. When the market wanted gold at $36, they sold tons into the market until it fell back to $35. When demand rose again, they sold even more. Whenever confidence wavered, they sacrificed their reserves. Whenever investors sensed weakness, the pool moved faster, like firefighters trying to hold back a wildfire that grows with every gust of wind. Nobody outside the elite circle understood what was happening. To the public, gold looked stable, predictable, almost boring. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. Central bankers watched the price like it was a detonator. A single dollar above $35 meant panic. A single rumor about American deficits meant another emergency meeting. Every uptick in demand was another pound of gold removed from the vaults and thrown into the fire. But markets don't care about promises. They care about reality. And reality was simple. The U.S. was printing more dollars than it could ever hope to redeem in gold. As European nations became more skeptical, gold shipments accelerated. France openly challenged the system, sending warships to collect its gold from New York, an act that wasn't symbolic, but strategic. It was a warning shot. Your promises are no longer credible. That moment sent shockwaves through Washington. If other nations followed France's lead, the entire global monetary system would collapse overnight. So the pool intensified its interventions. The Bank of England dumped massive gold reserves into the market. Other central banks followed. They acted like dealers trying to suppress the price of a scarce asset by selling their own supply into oblivion. It worked for a while. Every dip in confidence was smoothed over. Every speculative attack was temporarily repelled. Every central banker walked away exhausted but relieved. Yet every victory came at a price: less gold in the vaults and more dollars in circulation. The imbalance grew larger and the silence grew heavier. Investors began to sense weakness, not because the pool had failed, but because it was succeeding too perfectly. Prices that refuse to move are often the most manipulated. And when markets believe something is artificially controlled, speculators descend like wolves. By 1967, pressure on the pool became unbearable. Demand for gold surged as fears of dollar devaluation spread. Britain was running its own financial crisis. The global mood was shifting. After decades of trust in American leadership, the world began to whisper a forbidden thought. What if the dollar isn't safe anymore? The central banks met repeatedly, white shirts wrinkled, ashtrays overflowing, tension so thick it felt like physical weight. They debated options nobody wanted to consider. Raise the dollar gold price? Admit the system was cracking? Allow currencies to float? All of those solutions required honesty. The pool chose secrecy instead. They doubled their interventions. They tripled their gold sales. They bet everything on one goal: hold $35 at all costs. But the markets were now too strong, the deficits too large, and the truth too obvious. Gold was no longer just a commodity. It was a referendum on the credibility of the United States. Then came March 1968. The London gold market exploded in a frenzy of buying. Dealers couldn't keep up. Traders were yelling. Phones were shaking. Orders poured in so fast the market became physically unmanageable. For the first time, even the central banks realized the game was over. London shut down its gold market, an extraordinary, unprecedented act. And the pool collapsed. Gold was no longer defensible. The dollar was no longer trusted. The Bretton Woods system was mortally wounded. The world didn't know it yet, but within 3 years, Richard Nixon would close the gold window forever. And modern fiat currency, money backed by nothing but promises, would take over the world. As the 1960s unfolded, the gold pool's quiet interventions became a daily ritual, an invisible choreography of central banks moving metal across continents while pretending nothing unusual was happening. Official speeches spoke of stability, confidence, and global cooperation, but inside the vaults of the Bank of England, the truth looked far uglier. Gold was flowing out faster than it came in. Every morning, traders in the London bullion market watched the flood of sell orders, all orchestrated by governments desperate to suppress the price. And yet demand only grew stronger. Private buyers sensed that something was off. Foreign governments, especially France under Charles de Gaulle, began to question the honesty of the system. If the dollar was truly as good as gold, why was America fighting so hard to keep the gold price fixed? Behind closed doors, U.S. officials panicked. The Treasury sent urgent cables to European central banks. The Federal Reserve begged for cooperation. They all agreed publicly that the pool must hold at all costs. But costs were exactly the problem. The more Washington printed dollars to pay for war, welfare, and worldwide military commitments, the more foreign nations redeemed those dollars for physical gold. The math was impossible to hide. America had more claims on gold than the gold itself. Confidence was evaporating. The pool's gold shipments became a frantic effort to plug leaks in a ship that was already sinking. By 1967, the British pound was collapsing, France was openly demanding gold shipments from the US, and speculative attacks intensified. Traders sensed weakness. They smelled blood. And in financial markets, once blood hits the water, the feeding frenzy begins. The gold pool, this grand, secret alliance of the West, was not a fortress. It was a dam made of paper. Every central banker in the room knew it. Nobody dared admit it. And then came 1968, the day the dam cracked. The secrecy surrounding the London gold pool wasn't just a tactical choice. It was the only thing holding the illusion together. The entire Bretton Woods system depended on confidence, and confidence depended on silence. If the world understood how desperate the United States and its allies had become, the dollar would have collapsed years before Nixon ever stepped in front of the cameras. So behind locked doors in Basel, Washington, and London, a quiet agreement kept 8 central banks tied together in a financial blood pact. Their mission: defend the $35 gold price at any cost. On paper, it was simple. In practice, it was a race against gravity. And gravity was winning. Throughout the early 1960s, gold flowed out of the United States like water through a cracked dam. The Vietnam War drained the Treasury. The Great Society programs strained it further. Dollars flooded the world. Too many dollars, chasing too little gold, and foreign governments started lining up to convert paper into metal while they still could. De Gaulle was the loudest. The French president didn't bother hiding his contempt for the dollar-based system. He called it an exorbitant privilege, a polite diplomatic phrase for a rigged game. His central bank demanded ship after ship of gold from the United States, draining Fort Knox with a smile that said he knew the clock was ticking. Inside the Federal Reserve, panic grew quietly. The numbers didn't lie. Gold reserves were vanishing. Every month the pool had to dump more metal onto the London market just to stop the price from rising a few cents. Every coin sold bought a few more hours of calm, no more. Meanwhile, speculators smelled blood. They weren't fooled by the calm facade. Traders in Zurich and London whispered the same thing. The price should be higher, much higher. And when speculators believe a currency regime is dying, they bet against it with everything they've got. In late 1967, the British pound collapsed, triggering the worst wave of gold buying the London market had ever seen. The British government begged the United States for support, terrified the collapse would spread. But behind the scenes, officials knew the truth. The pound wasn't the real target. The dollar was. And 1968 would be the year the world called the bluff. The pressure kept building quietly in the background, like steam trapped behind a sealed valve. The central bankers knew it. They could feel it every time another European finance minister demanded gold instead of dollars. Every time another ship crossed the Atlantic carrying bullion back to foreign vaults. Every time another speculative wave slammed against the London market. By late 1967, the mood inside the pool meetings had shifted. The early confidence had evaporated, replaced by something more brittle, more desperate. The Americans insisted the system could hold. The British insisted they could still manage the flows. But privately, both sides knew the math didn't lie. The gold was leaving faster than they could replace it, and the dollar, the center of the global monetary universe, looked more vulnerable every week. And then came the breaking point. France, under Charles de Gaulle, called the system what it truly was, a fiction held together by political pressure and blind faith. De Gaulle announced he was sending his navy to physically retrieve French gold from New York. It wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a declaration of distrust, a public embarrassment, and a warning shot to the rest of the world. Once France openly questioned the dollar, speculation hit full force. Traders, governments, and large institutions rushed into gold, betting the pool would fail. And with every ounce bought in London, the pool had to sell one of its own to maintain the $35 price. The alliance was bleeding reserves, and fast. Inside the Bank of England, the numbers became terrifying. The pool had lost more gold in 1 week than in the previous year combined. At that pace, the vaults would be drained. Washington refused to revalue the dollar. London refused to break ranks. The other central banks simply watched the losses pile up. It wasn't just a market problem anymore. It was a credibility crisis. The very thing the pool was designed to protect, trust in the dollar, was crumbling with every sale. And then, on March 14, 1968, the market exploded. Demand for gold surged beyond anything the pool had ever seen. Tens of billions of dollars chased a price that could no longer be contained. London's gold desk couldn't keep up. Speculators lined the streets. Orders flowed faster than clerks could stamp them. In Washington and London, phones rang nonstop, each call carrying the same message: we cannot hold the line. By midnight, the pool was finished. Not officially, not yet, but everyone inside knew. The next morning, London announced an unprecedented move. The gold market would be closed. For the first time since World War II, the global center of gold trading went dark. And that blackout marked the end of an era and the beginning of the collapse of Bretton Woods. But inside those closed rooms, beneath the polished wood tables and the carefully crafted diplomatic smiles, there was a growing fear the public could never see. The members of the gold pool understood something the world wasn't ready to accept. The post-war promise of stability was cracking, and they were the only ones holding the fracture shut, one gold bar at a time. London, the beating heart of global bullion trade, was turning into a pressure chamber. Every morning the fix began the same way. Suited representatives gathering in a quiet room, settling into their leather chairs, pretending this ritual could still control a market far larger than any of them. But whispers were growing louder. Swiss banks were noticing unusual buying. French officials were privately questioning America's discipline. Middle Eastern states, enriched by rising oil revenues, were acquiring gold quietly, discreetly, as though preparing for a storm only they could see. And below it all, invisible to the public, the gold started leaving. Ton after ton. Weeks passed, then months, and the pool members realized they were no longer managing the price of gold. They were fighting gravity. The world was drowning in dollars, and those dollars were hunting for the one thing governments couldn't print. The more gold the pool dumped into the market to defend $35, the more the world demanded, a vicious cycle that even the most sophisticated central bankers could not outsmart. What had begun as an elegant mechanism to protect the global system had become a quiet emergency. And still, the public heard nothing. Because admitting the truth that the United States could no longer defend the dollar with gold could collapse the entire global order overnight. European officials started calculating their risks in secret. De Gaulle's France became the most outspoken critic, not because of ideology, but because Paris saw what the numbers clearly showed. The United States had exported more dollars than it could ever redeem. Gold was leaving Fort Knox faster than anyone dared acknowledge, and the arithmetic was brutal. If foreign governments kept converting their dollars into gold, America's reserves would vanish entirely. The gold pool was no longer stabilizing markets. It was buying time, but time was running out. In early 1968, panic began to seep into the very institutions that once swore loyalty to the system. British officials privately admitted they could not continue selling their gold without risking the pound. The Germans refused to provide additional bullion unless the United States guaranteed future stability, a guarantee Washington could not honestly make. Switzerland, always the most financially sensitive nation, quietly stepped back and watched. The tension reached its peak that March. Speculators, sensing weakness, launched a massive global attack on the fixed price. Lines formed outside bullion banks. Buyers came with cash, with checks, with anything they could convert into gold before the price snapped. London's bullion traders described it like a run on the gold vaults, a stampede of people desperate for the only form of money not tied to political promises. The pool responded the only way it knew how. It dumped more gold into the market. But this time the market swallowed it whole and came back for more. The dam finally broke. By early 1968, gold was no longer just a commodity. It was becoming a referendum on the credibility of the entire Western financial system. Traders in Zurich, Paris, and Johannesburg began buying gold faster than the London gold pool could sell it. The more gold the pool dumped into the market, the more investors demanded. It was a self-feeding panic. If central banks were so desperate to defend $35, then surely gold had to be worth more. Inside the Bank of England's basement vault, pallets of U.S. gold were disappearing at a terrifying pace. Air shipments from the United States to London became constant. A quiet, frantic pipeline meant to convince the world the system was still under control. But the numbers told the truth. America was running out of gold, and the world knew it. The weekend of March 14th to 15th, 1968 was the breaking point. Central bankers from the US and Europe locked themselves behind closed doors in Washington, staring at the impossible. In just 1 week, the pool had lost more gold than it had in the previous 2 years combined. They could keep selling and empty the US gold reserves, or they could stop and let the price explode. They chose survival. The London gold pool was dead. When markets reopened, gold soared. A dual market was announced. Official price, $35, free market price, whatever panic demanded. It was the beginning of the end. The world had just watched the strongest nations on Earth admit they could no longer control the value of money. Behind the scenes, it was clear Bretton Woods had been fatally wounded. The collapse of the London gold pool wasn't just a monetary failure. It was a confession. A confession that even the most powerful governments, the most respected central banks, and the most meticulously engineered financial systems cannot hold back the tide of market psychology forever. Once trust cracks, it spreads. Once confidence breaks, it collapses. Once money loses its anchor, the entire world feels the drift. The fall of the gold pool set off a chain reaction that led directly to Nixon closing the gold window in 1971, the birth of modern fiat currency, and a financial world built entirely on promises instead of metal. And whether we admit it or not, we're still living in the shadow of that decision. In a system where value is managed, manipulated, negotiated, and defended, but never truly secured. What happened in the 1960s wasn't just a monetary story. It was a warning, one we pretended to forget. If you want more deep dive documentaries exposing the hidden machinery behind global money and power, subscribe. The next episode goes even deeper into the shadows.